Good afternoon. Good afternoon here in the classroom. Good afternoon, everybody joining us remotely to the Maresonex seminar. My name is Dr. Peter Mullner. I'm here hosting this together with Dr. Steve Crowley. The Maresonex seminar is also part of a class, Materials, Resources, and Sustainability. Which the students are here in the classroom, and welcome everybody to today's presentation of David Abraham Perspectives on 15 Years in Critical Minerals. Before I introduce David Abraham, I would like to give you a quick run through the events of this afternoon. So after the introduction, Mr. Abraham will give a presentation of about 40 minutes, and then we will have a 5-minute discussion at the tables. For those joining us online, you will have the option to join that breakout room for discussing some discussion prompts about the presentation for 5 minutes. You might also just have a drink or take a rest and be back for the question and Q&A session that follows thereafter. Students that join us remotely, please do join the discussion group so that we can be prepared for questions. All right, and with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce David Abraham. He is an expert in critical minerals and the geopolitics of the clean energy transition. He is the author of the award-winning The Elements of Power, the first book to explore how the shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy is reshaping global power, supply chains, and economics. Research for the book took him deep into mineral supply lines across China, Brazil, Estonia, and Indonesia. With a background in Wall Street finance and energy trading, Abraham also served in the White House Budget Office, where he oversaw funding and programs for the Office of Surface Mining and U.S. Foreign Assistance Initiatives. His writing has appeared in Bloomberg, the New York Times, and the Los Angeles Times. Abraham also led a nonprofit building clean water wells in Africa and has held fellowships at the Council on Foreign Relations, the University of Tokyo, and the New America Foundation. Currently, he is an affiliate faculty in the School of the Environment here at Boise State University. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology from Boston College and a Master of International Economics from Tufts University. Abraham lives in Bangkok and is the founder of a live-work hospitality company with properties in Indonesia and Sri Lanka. Please help me welcome David Abraham.
It's been lovely to be here at Boise State. I think it's wonderful to see the vibrancy of the students, the faculty. I know you guys are just coming out of spring break, and Monday was a little bit slow, a little bit quiet, but it was great to meet a lot of you individually and hear what you guys are doing. And I've just been quite impressed by my 2 days here. So thank you for allowing me to be an affiliate Bronco. I did the campus tour and seeing the blue grass. So it was so far it's been a really wonderful experience. My job now is really to bring you back to 2010. All right. So 2010 was a time of great change and great evolution. And a lot of things were happening then. So we know Florida. Anyone know Florida? Any of his songs? What was happening with Florida at the time? Does anyone know? The club could not handle him. The club could not handle him at that moment. He came out with a couple other great hits, but that was the beginning of the legend of Florida. And the crazy, was it silly bands? Did people here have silly bands? I'm not too sure exactly what they were, but they seemed to be quite big in 2010. Everything okay? Oh. And finally, for those who may not remember, Katy Perry and Snoop Dogg. Yep. Oh, seeing this was really, I mean, this was kind of a transitional moment. This really ended her bubblegum pop era and really brought her into more of an edgy, bold, playful vibe. Maybe this is not where this should go based on the reactions here, but I digress. There were some very important things happening, but there were also some very important things happening in the environment at that time. There was Snowmageddon in Washington, D.C. So this was back in 2010 when 2 feet of snow shut down the government. There was a lot of discussion about global weirding at that time. There was a lot of investment with the federal government starting in 2009 in solar panels. There was a lot of, at that moment, solar panels were getting a lot cheaper, a lot because of the government investment. And there was a focus on how green energy is going to change the world. It was also the time, does anyone know what was happening here? I'm sorry? The BP oil spill. Anyone remember what was happening? What happened there? Oil spill. Yes, it was a BP oil spill leading to 90 days of oil going into the Gulf of Mexico at the time, right? And it was the largest, the Deepwater Horizon was the largest environmental disaster to hit the Gulf of Mexico. So there was real concern about the environment and how do we focus on green technologies. So much so that year was also the first year the Leaf came out, which is the Nissan's car that was the first general population EV that came out that year. 4G also came out that year. So there was a lot of, relying on that 4G was the iPhone 4. Now, the iPhone 4 was revolutionary at the time because FaceTime. So that was the first time we were able to make video calls, because before, the crazy us, we had to use the phone app on our phone to make phone calls. But revolution happened in 2010, so that we didn't even have to put the phone to our ear. Also, what came out that year was the iPad. It was the first tablet computer. It really started to revolutionize where we saw screens come about, and screens started emerging everywhere, from as we know now at Starbucks, but also on vending machines and throughout supermarkets, and we started to see that come about because of the tablet. So we were started to use, not just in green energy, but we saw technology really start to go around the world and in different places than we were expecting. And also something crazy happened towards the end of the year. There was these small little islands out here next to Taiwan. They're actually part of Japan. And late in 2010, there was an incident in this territory. And in Japan, they've considered these islands the Senkaku. They've been part of Japan for many, many years. But to many others, it's very controversial. So much so that you see 3 names here, because 3 different countries have at one point claimed this territory. So what happened back in 2010 in this remote area? Well, there was a Chinese trawler, a fishing trawler that was going out to this area to do what Chinese fishing trawlers do, fish. And then it ran into a Japanese Coast Guard ship. And what was the Japanese Coast Guard ship doing? Guarding the coast. And usually at this time, Chinese ships leave. This time, it didn't. And the Chinese ship rammed into the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard did not like that. So it detained the captain and brought the captain back to Japan. At that moment, or a few days later, these small materials that I never heard much about, even though I was involved in energy trading, called rare earths, were withheld from Japan. A few days later, the shipping boat captain was released. There were tensions that simmered down, but it was just surprising that these materials, not oil, not gas, not copper, but these random materials that people didn't think much about, brought Japan to its knees, and they released the captain. So the question is, what are critical minerals? You hear rare earths, you hear critical minerals, and there are lots of different definitions that people are using. Because if you look at the words critical and minerals, well, critical means it's important to somebody. And minerals, well, those are the resources that are coming from the ground. But what's important about critical minerals is that they're fundamentally different because of the attributes they have. Now let's go back to this slide here. Critical minerals don't make the car. right? They make the battery in the car. They make the car lighter. They make the battery more powerful. They make the motors more powerful. The 4G, the germanium, the gallium, they help to make the semiconductors stronger, more powerful. The iPhone 4 has half the elements known to man in that. Right? The dysprosium and neodymium help to make the phone vibrate and help to make the sound very clear. Terbium makes the color green. And you can go on down those 60 elements because they all do something very specific. So what we're seeing now is the proliferation, especially in 2010, of all of these materials coming throughout our entire supply chain. And Japan was very nervous because they make a lot of these. And they make components for a lot of all of these other equipment. And back then, there was really concern that they weren't going to have one subset of these critical minerals, which was rare earths. So what is a critical mineral? So to me, it's important to understand that these are produced in small quantities, in the hundreds or thousands of tons, or in some cases less. They're often produced as a byproduct. So they're not the material that's mined. They're the co-product that comes along with it, okay? That they're traded away from exchanges. So it's not like easily to go on to a website and find the price. These are often done by contracts between individual parties. So they're traded very infrequently. They're used in very specific applications. So you can't take one material out and put in another material without often fundamentally changing the product. So you all of a sudden would have a bigger battery. And if you have a bigger battery and you try and put it in a Tesla, you'd have to redesign the whole car to be able to fit the new battery in. It's produced in limited locations. Often one mine or one country can dominate production. And in many cases, that is China. That they undergo a high degree of processing. It's not like gold where it's dug out of the ground. These have to go through a number of steps to get from the mineral to the end material that's necessary. They flow through an opaque supply line. We often don't know where the material flows because they are done on individual contracts. And they're often, as I mentioned, they're often very difficult to substitute without losing functionality. So when we look at these critical minerals, it's easier to look on the periodic table, and you can get a sense of, wow, by the boxes in blue, there are a lot of these critical minerals. Right? Now, this chart is from the Minor Metal Trade Association. These are the people who actually move the materials from one place to the next. But one of the things that I want to be able to show you is that what are rare earths? And these, for the most part, are the ones, the blue on the bottom. Right? These are a subset of materials. They are a subset of critical minerals. They are often lumped together because they are found together. Therefore, they are processed together. So rare earths are a subset of critical minerals. But gallium, germanium, they're all critical minerals as well, but they are not rare earths. So why was this a potent weapon? Why was China's restriction of rare earths a really potent weapon? Because Japan could not make these materials quickly. It couldn't line up new mines very quickly. It couldn't line up new supply lines very quickly. It couldn't quickly process material, even if it had it, because the supply lines are so limited. Because China produces most of the concentrate, that they couldn't find other places to buy the material. And what sounds even more strange is that the know-how, the knowledge to produce the concentrate or the oxides or the next step is missing. We in the West, and in some cases Japan, had not been processing these materials for 20, 30 years. So that generation that really knew how to play with the materials and understand how to produce them, gone. So in 2010, there was a major awakening. And let's take China's perspective. So China became a massive producer in these materials rare earths, and many other critical minerals because of geologic good fortune. In many cases, they had the materials, so it was very easy for them to produce it. But other countries did have these materials, but China had two other advantages going for them. One, environmental regulations weren't quite as strong as other nations, so therefore it became cheaper. And there was a lot of focus initially on mining these materials, so the government was spending a lot of capital trying to produce these minerals so that they could sell them. But over time, the real important difference was China had a lot of demand. They needed the materials because they were producing the iPhones. They were producing a lot of what the West wanted, and they were producing the products, or almost to the finished state, when they would ship out to Japan for the final processing. And so they had a lot of demand. And what this shows was China was really angry because what they thought was China is wrecking its environment. It's chewing up its land. And then it's selling them the final products to Japan. Japan was turning them into really high value products, the optical drives. It was maximizing the value of Chinese resources, and China did not want that. They wanted to be able to produce the material in its own right. So the Chinese looked at the rare earth industry, and they knew that it was a small scale industry. I mean, even today, the rare earth industry is not much larger than the tonic water industry. Right? So we're talking about a handful of billion a year. These industries are quite small scale, but they have a huge contribution to the national economy. And that's what they knew back in 2010. And they wanted more influence in the economy. They were producing the metal that the world needs, and they couldn't figure out how to maximize it. They made it almost to the point where they could extract large value, but they saw Japan as putting in the final touches and then selling the product, and they felt they were losing out. Right? And they weren't just trying to sit there and focus on prices. Prices were not the issue. But for them, the issue back in 2010 was maximizing the resources. But the problem was that they couldn't manage the resources they have. It's hard to believe from this side, but the national government, Beijing, could not control what was happening in the regions. It was very difficult for them to stop a lot of the environmental challenges that they had because of the way the law works or doesn't work as efficiently there, right? But the facilities themselves were quite brutal. This was out in northern China, outside what are called cancer villages because the rates of cancer were so high. This is a processing facility in southern China that when I walked in, my eyes teared because there was so much fluorine that was loose in the facility. They weren't being produced, but this is where our high-tech goods came from. Right? They come from some really low-tech processing. And so what China was trying to do in 2010, before the detention of the captain, was they started to reduce their export quotas. That was a way that Beijing, who could control the ports, could start to affect the industry. So back in the 2010, they were focusing on how do we control this crazy industry. At the same time as how do we start to invest in our domestic industries, our green technologies that really use these resources. So they're talking about investing 30 billion back in 2010, but they were investing hundreds of billions in these supply lines to really use green technology heavily. Conversely, back in the West and in Japan, they were scared. They were very nervous that they didn't have the resources that they need. So Japan, heavily affected, did two things. One, they were nervous that their companies wouldn't have access to these resources. So they said, in order to get these resources, let's bring our technologies to China and we produce there. It was a short-term fix, but as you could imagine, that would probably create some long-term problems by bringing up all of their technology over there. And the second thing they did was they started to invest in other technologies like recycling, and they also started to invest in a rare earth mine. So they invested $1 billion, which was a huge amount in the critical mineral space back then. But they invested a few $100 million in Lynas, which is one of the two large, now is and still then was a large rare earth facility out of Malaysia. What was happening at the rest of the world at the time? There was a price spike, a massive price spike, because there was concerns about security of supply. So 2010 was a banner year, 2011 was a banner year to be in the rare earth industry. Everyone wanted to be in the rare earth industry. If you had a mine, it had occurrences of rare earths in there. Anyone was doing anything that they could to say, hey, I can be profitable at this price. Everyone said they could be profitable at this price. So if you just had a smattering of rare earths, you had a rare earth mine. There were over 400 mines at that time that were claiming to be a rare earth mine. Molycorp, which was the owner of the Mountain Pass mine, which is the mine in the US that mines rare earths, was becoming flush with cash. It was making some deals. It was getting, it was buying up certain assets around the world. It was a great time to be in the rare earth industry. People thought that they were going to be a fabulous ride and be able to produce their $2 billion mines. At the same time, companies got nervous. GE produced wind turbines with permanent magnets. And they said, well, we got to think this because we can't make any money if the industry is like this. Even if the prices don't remain high, I have to worry about security of supply, and China has all of the supply. So what do I do? The Department of Defense started a lot of their initiatives to focus on rare earth supply lines and other critical minerals, because what they saw was China turned off the spigot with rare earths. Maybe there's some other materials like germanium, gallium, bismuth that they should be concerned about. So DOD started research heavily back in 2010. And the Department of Energy put out its first critical mineral strategy at the moment. But then prices started to fall. 2012, 2013, 2014. By that time, people said, you know what? Yeah, this was kind of a one-time action. China, you know, the market's going to work. Materials are going to get where it's needed. The people who use the material, there's always someone who's buying it, who's relying on price. They're not thinking about security of supply. They just got to buy their portion, and they get bonuses based on how cheap it is. They're not really concerned about having a new mine open somewhere so that in the future they could have security of supply. Their bonus comes at the end of the year. So back in 2015, so back in 2014, a lot of the companies like Molycorp weren't doing so well. The prices had dropped, right? And it began weighing on the company's balance sheet. In 2015, two fundamental things happened in 2015. One, the Made in China 2025 strategy. Now, China had been investing in critical minerals and rare earths so much that they were trying to figure out how to use materials that because there are 17 rare earths, some are in oversupply and some are in undersupply. And they were trying to figure out how to use those or in oversupply in various ways so that that producing rare earths is always profitable. But back then, they were looking specifically as how do we use all of these products to dominate the production of aerospace, rail, new energy vehicles, agricultural equipment. They didn't want to just produce, they wanted to dominate. If you look at the targets, they are ambitious, they are aggressive. They wanted to produce 80% of the world's new energy vehicles, so your battery vehicles. They wanted to produce 80% of the high-tech ship components. You could just go down the list. Industrial robots. They wanted to produce more than half, almost 3/4 of the industrial robots. That means the rest of the world would produce 25%. Right? They wanted to dominate the production of these materials. And it was a fundamental change in the industry. And then there was a second thing that happened in 2015, probably one of the most fundamental things that has happened. We all remember where we were when this came out. There's the elements of power, which I would recommend you look at the bookstore if your bookstore had books. But if not, get a nice Bronco t-shirt. I think you'll enjoy that. So 2015 was when my book came out. It came out at a time where the industry was really in the doldrums. So Molycorp, that one mine in the US that was buying up assets 5 years ago, collapsed, bankrupt. Lynas was set to do the same thing, but the Japanese government had invested in Lynas, and the Japanese government is not ready to let its investment go. So it reinvested in Lynas to save that company. It was a pretty bleak time. But things started to change out in 2017. Mountain Pass, the mine, the rare earth mine that went out of business, back in business by some risky investors who are bringing it out, and the Chinese-backed SOE that also invested in the facility. It's important to note that the Chinese investment was necessary to make this a profitable mine. And the federal government, Trump, put out the federal strategy to secure reliable sources of critical minerals. And it was really setting a foundation, a strategy for the US to really jumpstart production. And it published a list of 35 critical minerals back then. They revised that in 2019. The Pentagon was going around the world trying to look where rare earths were, where germanium was coming from, really trying to bolster the supply lines for US defense applications. So it was trying to go around the world and find partnerships to be able to do that. Europe at that time was mostly sitting on the sidelines. And then 2020 happened. And I'm pretty sure you remember COVID. And what that brought to the fore was the supply lines. The supply lines. Ships getting stuck in the Suez because they didn't go a certain way, stopped ships from coming, prices started going up, and people realized, my God, the material just doesn't come to us directly. There are various paths that it have to go through. So the chaos behind it got the US government thinking about these materials as well, and they reflected on the EVs that were coming out and realizing, wow, Elon Musk laughed at BYD in 2013, 2014, said they were kind of play toys. But now BYD produces some world-beating cars. Maybe we should start getting serious. And the government itself started to look at what could they do? What's the role of the government? And what you see is that if you look at the legislative action that mentions critical minerals, you find that 2010 is a banner year for critical mineral legislation. Now, not all of it was the most intelligent, thought-out legislation, and sometimes in Washington, one person puts out a bill and then another person realizes they have to put out a bill that spells things slightly differently. But there was a lot of focus on critical minerals. And there is a lot of focus today. If you look at this is really 2025, 2026, we've just begun. And there's already a lot of legislative action. So there was really a lot of concern in the US about supply lines. And Biden had an approach. His approach was the US Mineral Security Partnership. Let's focus on partnerships with countries that have resources, and let's make global supply lines an alternative to what China has. It focused on green technology and EV demand. Let's create an ecosystem so that we need the materials in the US. It's important to understand that EVs are critical for green technology, but EVs are critical for drone technology. EVs are critical for any kind of vehicle or any kind of apparatus that needs a battery, any type of vehicle that needs a motor, because the vast amount of resources that they need we need to have a supply line that produces for the EV, and that same supply line also produces for drones, also produces for weapon systems. It's very difficult to set up a supply line just for a small weapon system, even though it may be critical. So the EVs, whether you think they're necessary for a green technology, they're really necessary for critical minerals. The other thing that was happening was a continuation of the DoD focus on securing supply lines. There was a tremendous amount of capital coming out of the federal government, DoD, the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce. The president at the time put out the Defense Production Act, which allowed the US to bypass certain regulations and to speed up mining. It didn't do a tremendous amount to speed up mining, but it was a start. The EU came in, and the European Union said, hey, what we're going to do is slightly different. We're going to demand that a certain percentage of the critical minerals that goes in products that are made in the European Union come from non-Chinese sources. So it was a way of putting in incentives that would make companies who produce end products in the European Union buy locally. So it was really a buy local campaign. So that has been their way to ensure security. In Canada, there was the focus of, you know what, let's not have Chinese involved in our mining. We want to have a supply line that's clean from any Chinese involvement. So it was, and it is the policy of many countries to keep China out of the supply line. And then Japan, again, pushed its strategy, which is really to enhance its companies like Hitachi to focus on recycling, to partner with other countries to ensure their own supply lines, and then to start deep sea mining. Japan doesn't have a lot of resources on its own small islands, so it's really reliant on bringing them in. And China continued ahead. It continued ahead. Shengha, which is the company that invested in Molycorp, that still to this day buys 80% or 85% of the US's rare earth material that's produced here, started spreading around the world, buying up other assets, Greenland, countries in Africa, Brazil. They're focusing on how do they use their capital and what we don't have, their expertise to ensure that China continues to get rare earth supplies. So no matter how much capital we have, what we don't necessarily have is the expertise that a company that has been producing the materials for the past 30 years does. And remember that Made in China 2025 strategy? Well, it's now 2025, and how effective was it? And it turns out it was really effective. It was very effective. Around 80% of the goals it was trying to hit, it hit. Electric vehicles, Chinese electric vehicles. Now, who has seen one? Has anyone been in a BYD or any Chinese electric vehicle? No, they are impressive. They're smooth like a Tesla, and they're cheap, and they perform. I live in Asia, so I see a lot of these. There are taxi fleets full of them, right? And they're spreading around the world, but not here. But they are a very good product. So they've been very effective. So it's a very big challenge for us to be able to kind of produce those supply lines that have been existing in China for many, 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 many years. So the Trump approach, and I will leave it at this. His approach is a little bit different than Biden. Very supply focused, very heavy focus on getting the minerals globally, opening up lands to get minerals locally, bypassing years of environmental regulations and any other, as we say, red tape to slow things down. the ability to bring processing facilities on Department of Defense lands, doing what it can to speed up the development of these mining and processing lines. And he's signaling to the market that it's time to invest. And that's one of the very important things about his policy, is not just how much he can, how much the administration can muster in terms of changing, of loosening regulations, but how much can you convince U.S. capital to move? Because U.S. capital, I mean, AI can bring trillions of dollars to the market, but mining and material processing historically has not. So this is a huge signal, and it's a welcome signal to people in the industry that we got to focus on processing the minerals and mining the minerals here. So it's about using all their authorities. There's less of a discussion on partnerships with other countries and ensuring supply lines are available. But there's definitely a focus on producing here in this country. So discussion time, or discussion prompt time. I'm curious, what do you think the biggest obstacles, hopefully from this class and other things that you've been reading, to establish a critical mineral supply lines in this country or in partner nations? And what do you think the best action the government can take or not take, if you feel that the government shouldn't take any action to address the obstacles of critical mineral security? Thank
You. All right, so now we are again at the time where we sit together here at the tables and discuss these discussion prompts. If you want to rearrange a little bit, that you feel that you're not alone, but find a group of peers. And online, you might join the breakout room that is about to open. All those who are students who join us online, please do join that breakout room so as that you can get ready for Q&A also. Those who do just want to sit back a little bit, we will be back in 5 minutes to have an open Q&A. Thank you. I believe everybody's back from the breakout room in the main Zoom room, and here also, please turn around and bring your attention back to the front. And with this, we will have, okay, there's a lot of energy in here, but we do need your attention finally back here. Thank you. And so we can have questions to our speaker. And one thing I forgot to say, please repeat the question since those online will not hear them. So that maybe we can get started. So who has the first question to David Abraham? Okay, please.
This isn't like the most related to critical materials, but do you think that the Chinese government sent that ship captain to run into the Coast Guard specifically so that they could leverage more control of the Senkaku Islands?
Oh, good. Okay, so you came over with the Senkaku Islands rather than, did they do this to then later restrict?
Yeah, like
so the question was, did these governments send over the shipping trawler to cause chaos around the Senkaku Islands and challenge Japan's control over them? Is that correct?
Yeah, it just seems weird that like a random fisherman would do that, and then the Chinese government would be like backing it up, I guess.
Yeah, it does. I would agree. It does sound strange to do that. And are there coordinated actions where a lot of Chinese fishing trawlers goes into Philippine waters or elsewhere? Yeah, it does happen. So it's either the fishing industry coming together and saying, hey, we got to do this, and we'll do this for nationalist reasons, or the Chinese government saying, hey, go out there and just go wherever where there's fish and you keep going and don't worry about any borders. There are a number of potential possibilities, and one being that, hey, let's send something out there to challenge their sovereignty.
I think China does China use to cut off exports to Japan for critical materials? Like, why would an event like that need to happen for them to be like, wait, we're just not going to give you these anymore?
So why did China, so thank you. Why did China need a event to shut off exports to a country? If it wanted to flex its muscles, it can flex its muscles at any time, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think the answer is, yeah, you're right. They could. They chose to do it at a time to say this could be a political weapon. If you're going to use a weapon, you kind of want to use it at a time when you may need it, rather than showing your weapon. So you don't want to launch things. But then there are times where you're testing a missile, but you usually try and test it around a time that's more effective. If you're North Korea and an American, president is going to Japan, you might launch a missile at the time so it's usually around an action to get the strongest leverage you could. So that's my geopolitical take. Great.
Question about how they were trying to have a percentage of, I believe you said, arguments that could not be Chinese. And my understanding is that if we have red tape, they must have red bricks around environmental stuff and around building new infrastructure around that. Can you elaborate on how they're kind of trying to go about that?
Sure. So there's the sense that yeah. So I was gonna do that. Yeah. So there's a sense that that there's a lot of red tape in this country, but there must be even more red tape in the European Union, and it must be a challenge for them to create a structure that allows them to develop its own industries through demanding that companies in their country use the resources that are produced locally, their content requirements. Am I close? Okay. Yeah, there is a lot of red tape, and this is the way they go about not focusing on it. They come up with a standard and say, you guys have to obey, get to this standard by 2030. By 2030, we don't know how you're going to get there, but good luck going to it. It's almost like the California's mileage, what is it, the mileage standards, where you have to, they say, hey, we don't know how you're going to produce these cars, but the fleets that you're selling have to be 50 miles to the gallon. So it's a very similar approach. And I guess the criticism of that is there's not really a strategy to get there. There's a lot of hope that, okay, how are we going to get 30% of all of these materials in here by 2030? We don't know exactly how we'll do it. So there's a lot of pushback against not the goal, but how do we get there? And I think that's the main challenge they face. Follow up.
Are they going to, is the European Union itself or individual countries going to be enforcing this? If companies don't reach their quotas by 2030?
And there was a question of how do you enforce that mechanism? It's very hard. You first have to get the traceability, where these materials actually coming from. And these supply lines are really deep. So when you where's the steel coming from in this table? All right, well, we know where the iron's coming from, but where is the manganese coming from? Companies who are making these tables don't know. So it becomes very difficult to trace. So I think on a high level, they can estimate, but it would be very hard. It is very hard to go after companies unless there's egregious, action where they see, this company continues to import when there are other domestic sources. But the hope is that will spur the development of domestic sources, and then people will buy locally.
Okay.
So my question was, you were talking about the recent administration's attempt to produce more locally, with one glaring exception being the Ukrainian minerals. If that were to go through, how would that bolster our mineral supply, so to speak? Would that be worth doing altogether, or is it just more power play? Like, what is your opinion of?
Sure. I don't know all of the language in the minerals deal. And my reading is that the US would somehow own the resources in some way. And therefore, there is some payment that the US would get for the resources because we're lending them the military equipment that we're paying for. So there's some kind of funding mechanism to get that money back. And then there's the sense that, oh, since these are American resources, we can go over there and develop them. Now, for critical minerals, the ones that not the iron or the materials like that, there aren't that many in Ukraine compared to a lot of other countries. And there's not a lot of infrastructure there because of the war. And it's not a stable environment. And it may not be a stable environment if there's a truce or an unstable truce. So it becomes very difficult to say that capital would flow to Ukraine to produce its resources when there are a lot of other more promising resources in Brazil or elsewhere that would be far easier to produce at less cost. So I'm not an optimist that any material would come from any Ukrainian deal within the foreseeable future.
Joe, I don't know if this is your realm of expertise, but you kind of alluded to the Chinese using the trade war as a weapon. Why are they trying to leverage that weapon and not just shutting the world economy down with these heavy metals? And why are they trying? Why are they exporting so much? And why are they not just keeping them in, controlling the whole economy?
Sure. So the question is, why aren't they keeping them in and controlling the entire economy? Why aren't they leveraging the resource it has even more and not export anything? I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind is that they are the largest producer of these materials, but they are the largest importer of these materials. So they're reliant on other parts of the world to get them the material that they don't have access to. So when you are resource dependent on other countries, you do tread a little more carefully than you might otherwise. They don't have a complete monopoly. I think paradoxically, they are bringing in resources from the US. So if we look at the rare earth mine, 85% of the resources come from the US. They do need that resource. It is helpful. It actually puts the US at a risk. The risk, because they buy 85% of the resources, what's the risk for the US companies if they buy 85% of the resources? That they stop. Yeah, they stop buying the resources. And so we are actually more at risk. So that's a power play they can do at any moment. They could shut down the US mine by saying, you know what, we don't need the resources anymore. And if 85% of your customers go, your business doesn't do well. So that would be something to look out for in the future. And then we don't really talk about that, how to weakness we are, because they're our customer. So there's a lot of more pain that China could cause. And if we start doing more activities around chips and not allowing technologies there, this is their response. So there's more shoes to drop if they wanted. Good question, Sean.
Taking price 80 to 85% of the rare earth that's mined in the US. Where is that other 15 to 20% going? Is that staying in the country, or is it going to Canada since they can't buy from China, or is it going to the EU?
Good question. Good question. Increasing amounts are being processed here. The MP Materials is opening up a magnet manufacturing facility in Texas, which it hopes to absorb more of its materials. So MP Materials is making strides to develop a market here. And there are other magnet manufacturers. Most of these high-valued rare earths that come out of Mountain Pass are for magnet materials. So the US is trying to develop that capability here. They're also used for cracking catalysts for fuel. But I believe they still have to go to China first and then come back. I don't remember that. But there is a little bit coming domestically, I'm sure. Japan, for sure, potentially Korea, Canada. You'd have to check their financial statements to have a better sense. And I'm sure there's some that probably going to Vietnam that's producing magnets.
You see like the initiatives that the current administration is taking to increase production here in the United States. Do you think that those will prove to be like helpful, or like what's kind of your take on that?
So if you are able to, thank you. Will the administrative efforts that are currently going through help the process of increasing mining in the US and increasing the processing capacity of the US? And yes, I believe it will. Anytime that you can speed up the mining process, it reduces the capital costs necessary. It increases certainty for investors that are investing in projects. Anytime that you can make the lands more available for production, and you can change the environment, the discussion of the environment, and create an environment where investors feel comfortable investing in mining, it speeds up. So yes, there will be fundamental changes because of the rules and because of the investment climate that will start to free up capital, for sure. The question is where do those materials go? How do they, develop? And that kind of TBD.
Sort of has to do with the Made in China 2025 initiative. We've seen 3 administrations over that period. No one's bothered to really counter it. In your opinion, is it the administration's failure? Is it our environmental regulation? Why have we seen the train wreck coming and we're still standing on the tracks?
Okay. So the question is there been a number of administrations coming out since China 2025 strategy was launched? Have we just accepted it, or what efforts have we made? I think the question is what kind of economy we have. What do we want to have going forward? And we've always focused on a service economy. And I think that is a good thing because there's a lot of value in the service economy. It's when you go around the world, you still see US banks, you still see consulting companies. The services are very highly valued, right? The tech companies, they're world-beating technologies. But the concern now is the resources are going into, let me step back. Right now, you're hearing a lot of conversation in Europe about not buying US weapon systems because they're fearing Trump is not a reliable partner, and there could be a kill switch on the F-35 or F-47 or whatever it is. So to make the equipment not usable for them, right? And so what we were starting to realize was that, hey, if we want to have a high-tech economy and we want our secrets on our laptops not going to China because they have access to chips, then we have to start producing here in this country, right? And that concern really wasn't top of mind 2017, 2018, 2019. And so we figured, we'll just have a service economy. But if you are of a belief that, we'll get the resources wherever they need, we'll build the economy that China can't be within all of our vehicles and can't be pulling all of this data from us, and then being able to produce world-beating services in the future, then we don't need to set up critical mineral supply lines. But if you're fearful that China will be able to dominate the production of the products and then be able to create services from them and create an economy that's dependent on China, then you want to be able to have supply lines here. So if you're focusing on services and think, hey, I'm not too concerned about the components, then you never focus on China. And historically, we never thought much about, back when the prices fell, we're like, hey, doesn't really matter. The materials will get to where they're needed. So it's more of this laissez-faire approach. And now we've never thought about industrial policy, and now we're thinking about that. We're talking about the government involved in the heart of our economy. And that's not the thinking that the US have had for hundreds of years. Now we're saying the government has to have a heavy role, and we need materials produced here. And the only way that can happen is a heavy role of the government. And that's thinking that's hard to change. Okay.
I think we've got Mark and then Jay. Jay, is that a follow-up to this, or
There's a follow-up to what you just.
is that okay if I pause you?
Mine is doing the same thing.
All right, okay, no, so in that case, we'll go with Mark and then we'll come back to you, Jay.
So the overall question I have is, are we right to demonize China? You're talking here about, we're afraid of China taking over control of the economy. They're already having this industrial policy that we're struggling to catch up to. There's this issue of arbitrariness and privacy, yet those concerns, they seem to be more manifested than they seem to be real. And what I mean by that is, like, we know with like the Patriot Act, the government can do a lot with privacy here in the United States. We know that the United States, through Trump right now, is being very arbitrary. There's a concern internationally. But are we right to give China that same role and to be desperate to get away from it?
So the question is, are we right to demonize China that they're doing something malicious? And are we? And then the latter part was.
The last, that's essentially it. And
Okay.
just going through the different things that you're talking about.
Well, China told us what they were going to do. They said we want to produce most of these products here in China, and so they've now gotten so good at the production process that they aren't just making the components; they're making the T-shirts and the Christmas lights. They're making the whole process, and so that means Tesla's market for EVs is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And BYD's market is growing, growing and growing and growing and growing. So the US government's thinking, well, this isn't good. This isn't helpful. We're going to be competing in an unlevel playing field because China has already set up these supply lines. And China's thinking, well, so what? We've just created the resources from the world. We make them cheaper. We're going to solve the green economy by everyone driving vehicles. What's wrong with that? You know, we told you what we've been doing and we're just good at it. So deal with it. But also China's getting to a point where its exports are now just starting to rock countries like Indonesia and Brazil and so forth. So they'll have their own issues to deal with. But I think it's a good question. Should they be demonized for doing what's in the best interest of their own country? Sounds like what we hear right now from our leadership, that America should be first. And China's saying, we should be first. We're doing it. So what's wrong? I think it's a fair question. Jade?
Yeah, my question is, we're talking about more government involvement in production, specifically related to rare earths. I was wondering, what would the viability of perhaps like a publicly owned or even a government-controlled mining company taking over a lot of this to kind of eliminate the overhead of the profit incentive?
I think there are a number of things that govern. Okay, so the question is can a government agency, a government mineral agency come in and make things more efficient by run the mines themselves? And it's not something the U.S. has necessarily been good at. The government has not really been known to run companies. I don't know it would. The challenges we face right now are a lack of knowledgeable people who understand these. I think what you're getting at is the government can deploy capital faster, but it still would have to deal with local, not necessarily opposition, but local concerns when putting in a mine. It would still have to deal with some environmental regulations. They would still have to face the same things that the private company could face. And I don't know if the profit incentive is the main concern at the moment. I think it's more of the timeline to produce these or to get these mines online, or the processing. But the government is trying to do that by saying, hey, you can use Department of Defense lands, which is not an insignificant thing. So.
Gosh,
So having your personal opinion, I guess, how much, so we're kind of based on a fiat currency now, 1970s, regular standard and everything. Right now we're on kind of a petrodollar, at least that's where like the foundation was, whenever people want to buy oil, they had to use US currency. Do you think that EV technology is going to be the new, or going towards kind of a currency that's going to be based on EV technology, and that's why China's trying to push so hard for that?
So the question is there going to be a currency based on the EV technologies? And my answer is, I am out of my elements. And I don't think I can give you an answer on that. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah.
Sure.
So, I think one of the main problems that we have is know-how. And I know that there was big industrial policy, previous administration of Chips and Science Act, where they were really trying to push a lot of capital into, institutions like this one develop harmful electronics. And I think actually Boise State has developed, they're trying to make a microelectronics officer, you think that it would be a good idea to do something similar in this area?
Yes. So the question is there's been a lot of certain industrial policies that the U.S. had that help steer money to educational institutions, right? In the focus of development of chips. Should there be more U.S. focus in U.S. dollars going to mining and processing of materials? Is that correct? And the easy answer is yes. There are 600 or so mining students in mining programs in the US, and there's over 1 million in China, right? Now you go back to your question, the demonization of China. Is that China's fault that they're outproducing the US in mining engineers? It would be hard to fault them. It would be like, hey, that's where they're investing in their human capital to help move along their own industries. There's not a fault there. The question is, what can the U.S. be doing? How can the U.S. innovate? How can we use our own talent to have breakthroughs in ways that are meaningful for the U.S.? And I think that the U.S. can do a lot. There's a lot of innovation here, not just in universities, but I think we have the skill to deploy capital to try and fail, because there will be a lot of failing in material science. But we have the ability to fail a lot, fail quick, and then eventually find something new. And I think the innovative processes can help us not catch up to China, but to produce something new. And that's where I think the opportunity is for the US.
What?
Anything about Florida? Katie, no? All right.
Folks don't know what you're missing out on. Going once. Ian, you're gonna have another shot?
I guess I'll go again. So, not to like open up the weeds too much, but overall, there's many other versions of ways to subsidize the market versus tariffs. What's your opinion on the tariffs versus, do you think that we can actually offset the costs for consumers based on lowering corporate tax rates? The tariffs paid by corporations anyway. Do you think that's kind of a strategy might be used in the future? Do you think that instead of doing tariffs, like, you think just stapling the price is something that we know would be profitable for the company where if it drops below this, the government now kicks in and just direct subsidize it, stapling it. And then there's also just direct subsidization. Well, or the network price, it's just a constant flow of money straight to the private corporation. I guess out of all these different options, and maybe more to know of, like, is tariffs kind of your preferred route?
Sure.
Or is there a different one you thought better of in the past?
So Ian, you asked the good financial questions, the important ones. So his question was, are tariffs the best financial policy or the best policy to produce materials in this country? And I would say that using tariffs is the equivalent of using a fork for acupuncture. Like, you're going to hit the right spot, but you're going to have a lot of unintended consequences. The unintended consequences are Ford, GM. All of a sudden, everything that they want to be able to produce has become more expensive. And it's more expensive not just in the US, but it's more expensive in every market around the world. And so do we have to put in policies that subsidize exports to offset for the tariffs that we put in? Are we better off with price floors? Are there other avenues that are more effective? And the short answer being, I think so. Yeah. I think tariffs are a very difficult way to spur industries in a long-term sustainable way. And the question is what is our goal? Is our goal to make things more expensive for Ford? I don't think so. Are we ready for that collateral damage? I don't think so. And I don't think Ford is either.
I'm going to cheat in. I've got no time. Yeah, very quickly. Mate. It feels like there's a lurking in the background of all of these questions is the sort of is the uneasy interaction between, let's say, geopolitics and economics. They don't always. They're sort of two different ways of identifying value or risk, and they offer different solutions, and they, at least in this particular case, they seem to be coming into conflict. Is that just inevitable? So are we just always going to be in this complicated trade-off between something like security concerns and an economic benefit of efficiency? Or do we just sort of take a deep breath and free trade our way to a brighter future?
So the question is, there's an inevitable clash between geopolitics and an open trade, and then security of economic security mixed in. And I think the short answer is yeah. there always will be these trade-offs, but I hope what makes us stronger is that there is this independent nature. I was in the water industry, and there was always concern about clean water access. And what people found that was nervous is that if water got more limited, that countries would fight over it. And what studies found 20 years ago was that if countries were both reliant on the clean water, they'd find ways to work it out. Now, I don't know if that's always the case, but it gives me hope for optimism.
Folks, join me in thanking our speaker one more time.
Thank you. Thank you.